When it comes to Star Wars, it's more certain than death itself that any project will suffer immense backlash, and frankly, a lot of it is very deserved. However, I believe the Acolyte has been seeing a bit too much. Like, we're really criticizing Star Wars for bringing in twisty lightsabers now? Don't misunderstand. The story for sure deserves criticism, just not the actors, you know? Lee Jung-jae learned English entirely for this show. You have to acknowledge that dedication. Like, he didn't know a lick of English when he did Squid Game, and now he knows basically everything. There's also a scene where you just see the emotions inside his face. Because of his portrayal, you can fully feel what Soul is thinking without any dialogue. Another standout performance is Manny Jacinto as Khmer, otherwise known as Darth Teeth. Weirdly, I've seen next to no criticism of this stupid-ass name. Maybe it's because he's the most interesting character in the whole show, even if you remove the fact that he was Plagueis' first apprentice. He's kind of like a combination of Palpatine and Vader in a way. He has the Vader trait of being an ex-Jedi, and is extremely manipulative like Palpatine. One odd scene with him, though, was the scene where he gets naked in the pool. I know we bug Star Wars for having fan service, but not that type of fan service. The only other time I can think of is the obvious skimpy Leia outfit during Return of the Jedi. He was also acting very Predator-esque towards Osha here, creepily asking her to get in the pool. To be fair though, he is the antagonist, and he could have been trying to form a connection with Osha to go against the Jedi, which were so opposed to attachments, especially at that time. Let's briefly talk about the Yoda cameo. I think it was the perfect dosage of fan service, rare for Star Wars. A split-second scene that doesn't intrude on the rest of the characters. Of course, the publications act like it's a scene longer than the Russian Ark, a movie shot in one scene. The only other existing characters that make appearances are Ki-Adi-Mundi and Darth fucking Plagueis, who is one of the main reasons why I want a second season, despite my issues with the show, because the things that they introduced as potential plots are way more intriguing than what we got. For starters, a bigger focus on Vernestra will mean a bigger focus on the Jedi's corruption, since she's lied to the High Council in order to protect Khmer. This is definitely something that we didn't get enough of in this season. I know Soul was corrupt in a way, for covering up the murder of May and Osha's mother, but he was the only one, and really, the mother pissed me off anyway, so I didn't even think he was that evil. The bitch tried to attack Soul with some literal black magic, like, "I will not let you take her." He retaliates by stabbing her, and she's like, "I was going to let Osha go with you." Like, what? The one thing that I think everyone agrees on is how good the combat is. Not only does this include the lightsaber fights, but the hand-to-hand combat as well, which is something relatively uncommon in Star Wars. I mean, when you really think about it, when's the last time we've seen a non-lightsaber fight this highly choreographed? A major standout fight without lightsabers is May vs. Osha in the finale, which screams like it's a scene from a classic kung fu film, and major standout lightsaber fights are both times Soul faces off with Khmer, especially with the addition of the slow-motion shots. People always praise the Last Jedi throne room scene for its slow-mo sequences, but these blow it out of the water. So essentially, we have Jackie Chan level kung fu and Akira Kurosawa level sword fights. Even if your mind isn't stimulated by the slower plot, your eyes will certainly be satisfied. Another positive for the show is its additions to the lore. A virgins in the Force that can create life is overpowered as fuck, but I love it. It also implies that the Force could be linked to witch magic, which since it has similar abilities. Another lore addition is that scene from the finale where Osha's lightsaber turns from blue to red. I don't recall this happening before, with the exception of Jedi Survivor. This implies that Osha going to the dark side was destined to happen, which makes me wonder how this ties into Anakin's prophecy. A small detail I appreciated was a lot of the episode titles being something and something, like Better Call Saul Season 6. For example, Axe and Grind, Fun and Games. Other decent characters were Jeki and Yord. I was very surprised to see them off so unceremoniously, especially with Jeki being implied to have a crush on Osha. I figured they would jump at the chance to showcase that more. I also initially thought Yord may have been the one to figure out Osha's secret, although I ultimately think Vernestra was the better choice, as it meant that we got more connections with the High Republic books, as she was a major character in a lot of the novels, and we also obviously got her link with Khmer. Speaking of the High Republic expanded material, I was pleased to be able to appreciate the overall era and understand it, despite not indulging myself in any of it. Although I do feel bad for all of the people like Star Wars Explained, who've spent a fortune on all of the books and comics, only to have little reward for that. Okay, I'm sure there were at least a few secret references that they were able to discover that I wasn't. Like how those who read the Rise of Skywalker visual dictionary would know that Maz Kanata keeps candy in her little pouch. Oh yes, thank you, visual dictionary. There's absolutely nothing else that I wanted to know about this character, such as where she got Anakin's lightsaber. My biggest complaint with the show, overall, is probably the flashbacks. We spent way too much time in the past. Episode 7 was especially overkill. We did not need an entire 8th focused on seeing the same events over again, just with a different perspective. If the season had more episodes, sure, but when we're already as pressed as a Pokemon game for cooking time, I think they could have cut that out. For a show with 8 almost hour-long episodes, it felt as though we didn't really get much done. The only benefit to having episode 7 was more screen time for the murdered Jedi, since they were killed so fast in the present day. Hell, we didn't even see Kalnaka alive. Another reason for this show feeling somewhat slow is the lack of characters. I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but I felt that the cast was extremely small, and any characters we did have didn't get any development if they weren't a main character. This makes the conflict feel smaller scale than it should be. I'm not arguing that we need 10 distinct Jedi on screen at all times, but not really following any characters aside from Osha, May, Sol, Khmer, and Vernestra, it was relatively disappointing. To contrast that to Andor, or even The Mandalorian, those shows introduce characters worthy of shows entirely dedicated to them. Kino, Karn, Luthen, Greef Karga, and especially Cobb Vanth, just to name a few. I really want that Cobb Vanth follow-up. Was he turned into a fucking cyborg or what? Maybe he'll end up leading those other cyborgs that everyone hated on. Don't get me wrong, I like Yord and Jeki, but I won't bust my balls if we don't get a show on them. The worst thing is, it should be easier for the Acolyte to make interesting side characters than Andor. Maybe not The Mandalorian, since that has the advantage of being more episodic, so it can introduce a new prominent side character each episode. But Andor has the disadvantage of being set in the most milked era of the franchise, which should have made it harder to make characters that weren't repetitive. The Acolyte doesn't have this issue, as it's the first time we're seeing the High Republic in live action, so making fresh characters should have been a piece of cake. Other complaints I have include the Pip droid. It's clearly just forced in there to sell merchandise. I think it would have helped the tone of the show if we didn't have a single comic relief droid. The show was marketed as a mystery thriller, and while there was certainly an intriguing enough mystery, it didn't really feel like a thriller. It's like how Goblin is meant to be a thriller, when it definitely isn't. To conclude, if I had to point out the best episodes, I would put episode 8 and 5 at the very top. Both of these felt like episodes where the shit finally hit the fan and had a good mix of both combat and reveals. The rest of the episodes, particularly in the first half, felt relatively boring on their own though. I rarely advocate for a binge release, as it takes away from the potential theorizing that you can do with other fans during the hype season. That's why Star Wars and Marvel shows tend to stay in the zeitgeist for so long, because they are on the air longer than a Boeing flight. In this case, however, the pacing could have benefited from dropping all at once, or hell, maybe even a part 1 and part 2 scenario. This is especially something I never wish for, as the wait usually becomes too painstakingly long, causing the audience to simply lose interest and move on to another show in the constantly flooded market. The Acolyte is an exception though, since you could have dropped the more slow, boring episodes that establish all the mysteries in part 1 with the first half, give the community a lot of time to simmer over the mystery and come up with truly wild speculation, and about a month later, drop the second half with all the reveals. The only potential downside is that I don't know if the Star Wars fanbase has learned the skill of patience yet. They weren't able to wait week to week for clarification without immediately accusing the creators of ruining canon, which is one thing the show didn't do. For that, I have to at least give it a C tier. Perfectly mid to a T. I never jumped out of my seat in excitement, but I was never appalled by much either, and fully believe a second season could fix a lot of the blunders. Hopefully Disney isn't discouraged by the reception and we're stuck eternally in the same tired Skywalker era for the rest of eternity. As Lawrence Kasdan has said, Star Wars is its own genre. It can be anything you want it to be. So let's make that a reality and continue to branch out from the Skywalkers, from the Rebels, from the Empire. As Kylo Ren said in one of the sequel trilogy's only good lines, let the past die. Well, okay, don't kill it. It's already been tortured enough, but you get the idea. Moving away from the classics may seem like a bad plan, as you'll lose a lot of fans who are only in it for the nostalgia, but failing to introduce new eras and characters is how Star Wars truly dies. For real this time.